So welcome everybody, and thank you for attending this IAQM webinar, Reducing Emissions from Road Transport, the Journey to a Net Zero Future. So today we are joined by Gloria Esposito, the Head of Projects at the Low Carbon Vehicle Partnership. Gloria's work experience has focused on local air quality management and greenhouse gas emission reduction for the last 15 years. Since joining the Low Carbon Vehicle Partnership, she has influenced a number of national policy areas, including the Clean Vehicle Retrofit Accreditation Scheme and Clean Bus Retrofit Fund. During today's webinar, Gloria will give an update on UK national policy related to reducing road transport, greenhouse gas and air pollution emissions, whilst also touching on charging and refuelling infrastructure. So as always, there'll be a chance for you to ask questions at the end of the presentation. Please do submit these in the Q&A option, which should be at the bottom of your screen, and do so at any point during the presentation. So I will then ask these on your behalf later on. So thank you all for logging in, and Gloria, I'll now hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Just briefly going to introduce myself before switching off my video screen. So Rihanna gave an excellent introduction. So I currently lead LowCVP's fuels working group activities, so very much focused on the low carbon fuel agenda, but as Rihanna said, have been and am still very much involved across different vehicle segments and technologies and fuels. So today, I'm just going to give you an overview of the current policy landscape and where we are in terms of a variety of low carbon technologies and fuels across cars, buses and trucks. So just as, hold on a second. Hold on. There we go. So just as background, in case you don't know, LowCVP is a multi-stakeholder organisation tasked with accelerating the sustainable transition to low carbon vehicles and fuels and ensuring that those are also clean in terms of air quality. We've been in existence for around about 15 years and have 200 members from a variety of public and private sector organisations, and the areas that we work are passenger cars, buses, commercial vehicles and fuels. And how we work is to gather stakeholders' views and opinions on the common challenges and issues. We then work to influence government policy, both in terms of designing that policy and actually delivering that policy in partnership with government. We work very closely with DFT, the Office of Low Emission Vehicles, and the Joint Air Quality Unit as well. We also do work in terms of trying to accelerate the uptake of both ultra low emission vehicles and low carbon fuels through engaging directly with fleet operators and local authorities. So we've done a variety of work, and just to show you some of them, for about 6 years we worked very closely with the DFT, developing new car fuel economy labels, and those labels show the CO2 emissions for different vehicles that are on sale, and we created those labels for ICE, battery electric and plug-in hybrid, and that was a very innovative piece of work. We've designed and run accreditation schemes, including the ultra low emission bus scheme, which you're probably well aware of, and the clean vehicle retrofit accreditation scheme as well. We've supported a number of policy areas, including a wide number of low emission bus grant schemes, including the ultra low emission bus scheme, helped on the plug-in van grant, the labelling scheme, and various retrofit funding schemes as well. And more recently, we've been heavily involved in the Office of Low Emission Vehicles on leading an electric vehicle energy task force, which is really looking to ensure that the infrastructure that's required for the rollout of electric vehicles can be supported by a smart electricity grid. We've produced a variety of technology and fuel roadmaps and guides for both fleet operators and local authorities. We do a fair amount of vehicle emissions testing programs, both designing them and analysing the data. And we also do various research based on vehicle life cycle analysis and fuels assessment. So you can see all this on our website. So just really diving into the detail, just to set the scene really, first of all for greenhouse gas emissions, that road transport now is responsible for 24% of UK greenhouse gas emissions, and it's the highest emitting sector. And we've seen reductions in greenhouse gas emissions from, for example, the power, the electricity sector, from the increase in renewables and decline in coal. But for transport, since 2014, that really has been rising. Cars contribute the largest proportion, 69%, and HGVs about 20%. And that's been a combination of factors. Passenger cars have become heavier, there's been more SUVs, there's been more movement of freight vehicles as well, especially with online delivery. So whilst vehicles, especially the car market, has become more efficient, the mileage has increased as well. So we urgently need to reduce our transport greenhouse gas emissions. From an air quality perspective, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, roadside NO2 concentrations continue to breach air quality standards, and the main contributors are diesel vehicles, predominantly cars, but we've also got a large proportion which is vans and HGVs as well. And there's been a lot of work with the National Clean Air Zone framework to try to address, obviously, improving air quality emissions. From a particular perspective, there's been more emphasis recently on non-exhaust PM10 and PM2.5, which obviously can't be necessarily addressed with clean vehicle technology. So the government has really tried to address these twin challenges of improving air quality and mitigating climate change from a range of national policy areas. We've had an industrial strategy that's very much focused on zero emission vehicles. It's important to say zero emission tailpipe, and the Road to Zero strategy, and all those policies and strategies have been very much focused on increasing both the supply and demand of zero emission vehicles. And there's been a range of fiscal incentives for ultra low emission vehicles, and those are vehicles that achieve more than 75% CO2 per kilometre savings of emissions. And there's been infrastructure funding as well, both for home-based and workplace charging as well. But also integrated into the need for zero emission and ultra low emission vehicles has been the requirement for an improvement in air quality as well. The government has an ambition set in its Road to Zero strategy for 50 to 70% of new cars and vans to be zero emission by 2030. You're probably aware that there was an ambition to ban the sale of ICE vans and cars by 2040, and a recent consultation has been released by government, potentially looking to move that date forward to 2035 as well. Obviously, tackling air quality is an important area as well, and the UK plan was published in 2017, and that set the framework for clean air zones, very much focused on minimum emission standards for diesel vehicles Euro 6 and for petrol Euro 4, with an emphasis as well as retrofitting for older diesel vehicles to enter charging clean air zones, but obviously clear benefits for zero emission vehicles as well. There's also been an interest in decarbonising road transport in terms of low carbon fuels, and over the past 10 years the DfT has had a renewable transport fuel obligation policy, and by 2032 12.4% of energy will be through renewables fuels sold in the UK, and that's very much focused on fuel life cycle analysis. Well, what we saw last year was the amendment of the Climate Change Act really brought forward the need for rapid greenhouse gas reduction and the introduction of the net zero greenhouse gas target by 2050. The Climate Change Committee has done a number of detailed reports outlining a number of recommendations. And as you can see by the chart, the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from road transport by 2050 are quite significant. And it also requires overall the approach of using negative technologies in terms of bringing greenhouse gas emissions down. And that includes technologies like carbon capture and storage and direct air capture units. But in terms of transport, greenhouse gas emission reduction, the CCC is really pushing for a 2035 date for all new cars and vans to be electric, hopefully a sooner date. For HGVs, also the intention is by 2050, even by 2060 potentially, for zero emission vehicles. But the technology roadmap isn't clear yet, whether that could be hydrogen fuel cells or battery electric vehicles using catenary. But I think from LowCVP's perspective, we just like to highlight that when thinking about greenhouse gas emission reduction, we need to look at well-to-wheel reduction. That's taking into account the carbon intensity of the fuel or energy vector, how that's produced, as well as tailpipe emissions. Now, in terms of new policy, the government plans to introduce its new transport decarbonisation plan in December. And that will outline across transport policies and recommendations for greenhouse gas reduction for road, marine, aviation, all the way up to 2050. So look out for that document. So what I'd like to do now is just give you a whistle-stop tour on the progress that's being made from a number of areas. So let's start off with passenger cars. You're probably familiar with the Automotive Council and APC technology roadmaps. These roadmaps are created to really drive R&D in terms of ultra-low emission vehicle technologies right up to 2040, 2050. And they're the drivers behind those are EU CO2 targets that manufacturers have to meet, and also the environmental agenda, which is clean air zones and zero emission zones as well. But as you can see here from the technologies for cars, it's very much focused on plug-in hybrids right up to 2035, and then battery electric vehicles really achieving mass production right along to 2040, and also the use of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. But it's important to highlight that the mass adoption of electric vehicles will take time. We require them to be affordable for consumers, there needs to be choice, and there needs to be a national charging network. But as we have seen, that improvements in fuel efficiency and increasing electrification will help meet these stringent targets of 95 grams per CO2 by 2021 that manufacturers will meet, and those are becoming much stricter over time. So in terms of the UK car market, we're now at around about 10% sales of electric cars, and that's been very much focused on fiscal incentives. We have the plug-in car and plug-in van grant that's contributed to help cover the increased capital cost of ultra-low emission vehicles as well. And we've now seen about 300,000 ultra-low emission vehicles, and half of those are electric. What we're seeing is less growth in the electric van market. There hasn't been such a greater uptake in terms of the plug-in van grants, but we're beginning to see more opportunities there in terms of models on the market. We need to appreciate that there's 35 million diesel and petrol cars on the market, on the roads, and about not even 1% is now ultra low emission. So to meet the government's target of zero emission vehicles by 50 to 70% of new car sales by 2030 is very ambitious. So throughout on the international landscape, the majority of manufacturers are now forecast to be introducing an increasing number of electric vehicles, and they can be, for example, predominantly battery electric, plug-in hybrid, but we're also seeing some OEMs also introducing hydrogen fuel cell, but that's much less. But what we need to point out that lithium-ion battery manufacture, obviously lithium-ion batteries are the energy source of electric vehicles, will need to keep will need to keep up pace with the demand of electric vehicles, and it needs to be sustainable in terms of the extraction and the processing of those raw materials that are used to make the lithium-ion battery. They're not just lithium, they cover other raw materials such as cobalt, graphite, and manganese as well. So at the moment, there are over 130 electric vehicle models, and there's around about 300 diesel and petrol. So this is good. I mean, we're moving to give consumers more choice, and we're looking to see cost parity in certain segments between petrol and diesel vehicles and electric vehicles by 2025. One of the key issues has been range anxiety, and at the moment about 70% of battery electric vehicles achieve an electric range under 200 miles, but now you're getting an increase such as the Tesla Model 3, the Jaguar I-Pace in reaching 250 to 300 miles. We're also seeing plug-in hybrid range extender black taxi, probably the LEVC TX, and also 2 hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, the Hyundai and Toyota as well. We're now seeing an interest, a growing interest in last mile delivery, particularly good in cities with air quality challenges, for electric vans and private light goods vehicles to move over to battery electric. The improved energy efficiency of battery electric vehicles at low speed does offer cost benefits in terms of improved fuel costs for these companies. And they're also having increasing requirements for company greenhouse gas reporting, so are moving over to zero emission technologies. The van market has seen a rapid increase in use over the past 10 years, which has caused air quality problems and CO2 emission increases as well. But we're beginning to see a range of manufacturers, including Ford, Renault, bringing in battery electric and plug-in hybrid vans. Some of the challenges are obviously higher capital cost, some payload impacts as well, because you're going to have a battery taking up quite a bit of space, and range can impact as well some applications as well, but looking promising. We then move over to EV infrastructure as well, and there's been various government schemes looking at home and workplace charging, as well as providing financial incentives for local authorities as well. And the majority of people charge at home, then at work, and probably about 10% require motorway charging. And there's different types of chargers which require different time. We've got slow chargers, which is about 3 kilowatts, right up to ultra rapid charging, which is 43 kilowatt hours, and that will take about 30 minutes. But what we're seeing is that infrastructure will need to rapidly increase to meet the 2030 needs of consumers, and the CCC are suggesting that 85% of charging stations need to be rapid, but there are challenges which you're no doubt aware of, including interoperability challenges. There's different payment schemes, charging speeds, connectors and cables. So those issues need to be resolved. But as the grid decarbonises, so will the carbon footprint of electric vehicles. But we need to make sure that the grid is appropriately and managed smartly, because there will be an increase in energy demand, and that will have an impact, especially at peak demand, on the local electricity networks. That's something that's being addressed at the moment by government, and some work that LowCVP are doing as well. So moving on quickly now to buses. Buses have really been leading innovation. There's now 7,800 low emission buses, and they cover battery electric, compressed biomethane gas, hydrogen fuel cell, efficient diesels, and hybrids as well. And there's been over £200 million worth of government incentives to fund not only the additional capital cost of the vehicle, but the infrastructure as well. Now, the criteria for an ultra-low emission bus is that it has to achieve more than 30% well-to-wheel greenhouse gas savings and achieve the Euro 6 emission standards as well. So the technologies at the moment that achieve that are battery electric and hybrid, and there's soon going to be accreditation of hydrogen fuel cell buses. So at the moment, about 2% of the UK fleet is electric, predominantly using lithium-ion battery technology, but we're beginning to see supercapacitors as well as the energy source, but the electric range for those is much smaller. The government has an ambition to have 4,000 new zero-emission buses by 2025, and as you know, the bus industry has been significantly affected by COVID, and they're looking at a recovery package as well. So just looking across the country, really, London, as you would anticipate, boasts the largest zero-emission fleet, and TfL has committed to a completely zero-emission bus fleet by 2037. They've got both battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, and there's more coming. Interestingly, the first hydrogen fuel cell double-decker bus has now gone on sale in the UK from Wrightbus, and London, Birmingham, Liverpool and Glasgow are looking to deploy hydrogen fuel cell buses, but it's important the hydrogen used to charge those buses, to refuel them, is actually low carbon. Other pioneers include Greater Manchester, Nottingham and York as well. So we are really beginning to see the rollout of buses, and there's more funding, no doubt, coming. Some of the innovation that's happening really needs to relate to the charging of electric bus fleets, because it can be challenging. So for example, in London, the Go Ahead garage in Waterloo has probably one of the largest e-bus fleets. It's probably charging at the moment about 52 battery electric BYD and ADL buses. And this is the first vehicle to grid site, where basically all the electric buses, their batteries act as an energy store, where the electricity can then be given and back to the grid. In order to overcome some of the challenges of upgrading work that's required to the grid to take into account extra, electricity demand, Zenobē has introduced stationary battery packs at bus depots, and Stagecoach has been deploying that technology and avoided the cost of extra grid uptake. We're also seeing pantograph technology, which is overhead charging. Typically the batteries have a much smaller range because they have what's known as top-up charging, and Harrogate Bus Company has deployed those as well. Now moving over to trucks, like cars and vans, the truck market is very much focused on meeting European CO2 regulations. And truck manufacturers have to reduce their fuel consumption by 15% by 2025 and 30% by 2030. And that's really driving improvements in terms of ICE technology, but also stimulating the adoption of hybridization and battery electric technology and hydrogen fuel cell for some manufacturers. But at the moment, it's a very niche market. We've got several OEMs in city fleets, I should say, offering battery electric vehicles that can go up to around about 150 miles. And we've also got the first range extender TEVA truck, which basically has an auxiliary power unit, which is a diesel engine, which provides additional top-up charge for that vehicle. But obviously, the more that you use the diesel engine, the less emissions benefits there's going to be. So at the moment, there's battery electric trucks and range extender, RCV battery electrics. The Dennis Eagle has one, and that's being used by Veolia. And on a well-to-wheel basis, we're seeing, using the current electricity grid, an 81% improvement in greenhouse gas emissions in city operations. But these vehicles do still have a high capital cost. We're not looking at cost parity probably until the 2030s, and they do need government support. The plug-in van grant has been extended to include some models of city trucks, and they get an additional £20,000. But we still need to look at some of the challenges with grid decarbonisation as well. In terms of hydrogen, interestingly, there's been growing interest in hydrogen, especially in heavy goods vehicles, but at the moment, there are no hydrogen fuel cell trucks on sale in the UK. The market is very much flourishing in Europe and Southeast Asia, but obviously hydrogen fuel cells offer benefits over battery electric vehicles in that they at the moment have a much higher range, a quicker refueling time, and can have less payload impacts. But the well-to-wheel greenhouse gas emissions of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles is very much predicated on the hydrogen supply chain. It can be up to 30% worse than diesel, or a 30% improvement. There are dual fuel Ulemco conversions for hydrogen RCVs and sweepers, and they're being rolled out in Glasgow and in Aberdeen. But we need to appreciate that depending on the rate of substitution for diesel and hydrogen, there is going to be NOx and PM emissions as well. And as mentioned, the well-to-wheel savings will depend on the diesel substitution rate. So at a national level, we've got 14 hydrogen refuelling stations, but they're very much focused on cars and vans, not for heavy-duty vehicles. But for heavy duty fleets, it's very much depot-based charging, and hydrogen can be produced on site using an electrolyzer that will split water and generate obviously hydrogen, or it can be brought to the site, being produced elsewhere. But the installation of refuelling infrastructure is expensive at the moment. So looking beyond 2030, the roadmap for long distance trucks is a little bit unclear at the moment I think from the government's perspective. There's a lot of interest in using battery electric vehicles with overhead catenary. Siemens has been demonstrating these in Germany. We need to appreciate there's significant challenges with long distance trucks. Their routes are unpredictable, they have large energy demands as well, and they cover vast distances. So whether we're looking at battery electric using catenary, whether we're thinking about hydrogen fuel cell trucks, either will need infrastructure. And some recent work that the Climate Change Committee has undertaken has shown that by sort of 2050, we might need 550 hydrogen refueling stations. The government is currently looking at demonstration trials for hydrogen fuel cell trucks and catenary systems. But as you can see on the roadmap here that's shown, this technology roadmap for heavy duty vehicles, I'd just like to point out the important role that sustainable fuels will have in Euro 6 and beyond, diesel and gas engines. And they'll have an important role to play. And the fact is that they won't have any infrastructure challenges. And going forward, these fuels will be able to just drop in to the existing ICE engines that are in development. Just very quickly, I'd just like to touch on fuels. I've got now just over 4 minutes. So I'm just going to talk about, I think it's important to think about, hydrogen in terms of the carbon intensity in the supply chain. So at the moment, low carbon hydrogen supply chains are just starting to enter the market. But the large-scale rollout won't be until the 2030s, and I think we need to appreciate that in terms of when hydrogen fuel cell vehicles will start to be deployed at mass. The carbon footprint of hydrogen is highly influenced by how it's produced and transported. We need to look beyond the tailpipe. So the majority of hydrogen today is produced by the reformation of natural gas, SMR, and it's also produced as a byproduct from industrial processes such as the chloroalkali. But the carbon intensity is worse than diesel, so we do need low carbon hydrogen pathways. And those are seen as being blue and green. So for blue, we've got SMR fitted with carbon capture and storage. And there are several demonstration projects underway in the UK that are looking at industrial clusters of replacing natural gas that was used in industrial processes with clean hydrogen and using carbon capture and storage to eliminate the CO2 emissions. We obviously have completely renewable hydrogen produced from the electrolysis of water, which needs renewable power. And there's a lot of interest in on and offshore wind. And that's going to be seen as early supply chains for an early market for providing the hydrogen, renewable hydrogen for buses. And still in the demonstration phase, we've got gasification of biomass, so biosyngas, where you reform that bio-CNG and get the hydrogen that's completely renewable. But it will take time to scale up the supply chains, but we'll also need infrastructure. It's worthwhile pointing out that renewable hydrogen is also used to produce what's known as ultra-low carbon synthetic fuels and e-fuels. There's a lot of interest in these fuels from the aviation sector, but they're also promising for long-haul trucks and the marine sector as well, so very much in the demonstration phase. So thinking about low-carbon renewable fuels, as I've mentioned before, the UK government has the renewable transport fuel obligation. At the moment, we've got about 5% of road fuel is renewable in terms of retail, but the government sets very stringent sustainability criteria. So renewable low-carbon fuels has to achieve more than a 60% greenhouse gas savings compared to fossil fuels. And in terms of energy crops, they can't be cultivated on land with high biodiversity or high carbon content. And at the moment, renewable fuels achieve an 82% greenhouse gas saving. The majority of fuel is actually produced from waste product, and biodiesel makes up 61% and ethanol 31%, but that is produced predominantly in the UK and in Europe from corn and sugar beet. There's a much smaller supply of what's known as high blend biofuel, and that's used in buses, HGVs and non-road and mobile machinery, including HVO, LP and LPG. We're beginning to see more advanced technologies, so using more waste-based materials and more advanced processes, which will really lower the carbon intensity even further. And the RTFO is also incentivising renewable hydrogen. Just finally, there's an opportunity really when we've talked about long distance trucks. It will take time for zero emission trucks to materialise and to have mass market production. But in the interim period, there is a great opportunity of using clean trucks that meet the Euro 6 emission limits with biomethane. So at the moment, we've got both compressed natural gas and liquid natural gas trucks available in the UK from a variety of manufacturers. And they can be you can directly substitute the natural gas with biomethane. And there are 600 trucks in the UK running on biomethane, and they can achieve up to an 85% well-to-wheel saving. And that biomethane is produced from waste feedstocks, whether that's sewage or food waste. But when biomethane is produced from manure, because you're capturing fugitive methane emissions, those greenhouse gas emissions are seen as negative, and that's very important. And there's a number of fleets and local authorities moving over to biomethane. We've done some work on life cycle analysis, looking at the carbon intensity across the whole vehicle from production, in use and end of life. And what I wanted to really highlight from this slide is that in order to meet net zero greenhouse gas emissions, we will need a variety of zero emission vehicles and low carbon fuels. And on this chart, we've got, plug-in hybrid electric trucks, we've got hydrogen fuel cell. But as you can see, using biodiesel and using biomethane can really achieve significant greenhouse gas savings. So in the next 10 years, those fuels will have an important role to play. Final, as promised, just to touch on retrofit, because obviously that's very important in terms of air quality and achieving an opportunity for NOx reduction and PM reduction in cities with clean air zone challenges. And you're probably familiar with the Clean Vehicle Retrofit Accreditation Scheme that EST and LowCVP created. Now, at the moment, there are 4 key technologies that have been accredited. Selective catalytic reduction, which is the technology that's used in Euro 6 vehicles. You can replace the diesel engine with a completely electric drivetrain. You can replace the diesel engine completely for Euro 6 standards. And you've got conversion of black taxis to LPG. And at the moment, there's 6,000 vehicles that have been retrofitted across a range of vehicle segments. So if you look at the Clean Vehicle Retrofit Accreditation Scheme website, you can see all the technologies that have been accredited to date. So I've finished now. Thank you, everybody. Sorry, that's been a bit rushed at the end.
Thank you, Gloria. That was really interesting. Some really valuable data that you shared with us. So thank you very much. We've got a couple of questions come through and we've got some time to do them, which is great. So just to kick off, in the future, do you feel that hydrogen would be largely confined to heavier vehicles? Have cars essentially missed out on this opportunity?
I don't think cars have missed out, but I think from the technology roadmaps that we're seeing from the automotive industry and from work done by the government, there is definitely an interest in hydrogen being used for heavy duty vehicles. I think there is going to be a niche opportunity for the car market, but I think it's going to be very much focused in heavy duty, not only for buses, but for trucks as well, especially long haul.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question from one of the attendees who says, electric vehicles have benefits in terms of emissions locally and globally. In terms of the batteries for electric vehicles, is there any study or information available about potential impacts on the final disposal?
That comes under life cycle analysis, and actually there's been a very interesting piece of work that was done by DG Klima in Europe, and that was one of the biggest life cycle analysis studies undertaken on a range of vehicle fuels and technologies, and that does cover recycling as well. It's obviously a very critical part, and in the UK we're doing a number of research projects looking at how not only lithium-ion batteries but magnets can be recycled as well, but it is very much, you know, in its infancy, and it's very important so that we reduce, obviously, the environmental impact associated with producing batteries as well.
Okay, excellent, that makes sense, thank you.
Happy to share that piece of that life cycle analysis work if it's of interest.
That would be really useful. If you have it immediately available, please could you put it in the chat box? If not, I can attach it and share it with attendees afterwards.
I'll attach it, yeah.
That's fine, yeah, we can do that afterwards. Another question is, what are the assumptions for volume of truck journeys in the future? Do they assume that continued growth in consumption and imports and imports, or look at any reductions as in increased local manufacturing, etc.?
Well, is that a manufacturing question? Well, in terms of distance travelled and fuel use, that will no doubt increase over time. I don't see there being a reduction in miles travelled, but the majority of truck technologies will be no doubt imported into the UK, but we will probably be looking at developing our own technologies as well.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Another question is there a role for methanol as a biofuel, in your opinion?
Methanol, yeah, methanol, well, biomethanol, we should say, is already being used in certain processes in terms of producing biofuels. Methanol, there is a lot of interest in terms of using methanol, especially in the marine sector, especially. But I don't think for road vehicles it particularly has a role at this moment in time. It has a lower energy density than petrol, which was one of the challenges. But I think the main use of methanol will be in terms of decarbonising the marine sector and using methanol as an energy storage, and also in terms of liberating hydrogen.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And how are non-exhaust particulate emissions going to be addressed through this work? Have you had any involvement in that?
No, it's a very interesting area. I think that's going to boil down to using less vehicles at the end of the day. I mean, I don't know of any technology. Well, there has been some work I saw recently by Imperial College had used a technology to actually capture you know, fugitive resuspended particulate emissions from vehicles, but at the moment I don't think there's any other technology at the moment that needs to address that, and it's something that's very important as well. I think there's going to be more work in terms of trying to monitor and measure fugitive emissions. Very difficult, I appreciate.
Okay, excellent, thank you. I've got one more here. It says, I believe there are concerns about the NH3 slip from SCR technologies, which can again contribute to air pollution. Is this taken into account in the consideration of the retrofit technologies?
Yes, it is. It is. The retrofit accreditation scheme does include limits for ammonia. It's very important when you're talking about selective catalytic reduction. So in the Clean Vehicle Retrofit Accreditation Scheme, there is limits for ammonia. And also we have limits for greenhouse gas emissions, because as you're probably aware, with selective catalytic reduction, you do get an increase in nitrous oxide as well. So we do take into account greenhouse gas emissions and ammonia, very important.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And what is the plan with the stored carbon, with the carbon storage process?
In terms of carbon capture and storage, yeah. Very interesting question. Well, the idea is in the redundant oil and gas wells deep in the sea, those gas wells will be used to store carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide will be injected under pressure, and it will be stored in impervious rock, we hope, where this is seen as a method of capturing carbon dioxide. But it's important to say that these projects are still in demonstration. They're yet to be economically viable. So it's a wait and see. But I think we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as much as possible in the next 15 years than sort of relying on the long term on these technologies that will capture and sequester carbon in that way.
Excellent, thank you. And do you think major highways projects today should be designed ready for the potential catenary overhead cabling for HGVs in the future?
I think we need demonstration trials. I think we really need to understand the practical and the economic challenges that are associated with that. Some work that was done for the Climate Change Committee identified over 3,000 kilometres of catenary might be required. That's huge, and I think you need to understand that in the context of how HGV operators use their vehicles as well. So I think it's very much understanding the practical and financial implications of deploying the technology before we sort of dive into making wholesale changes to our national road infrastructure.
Of course, that's logical. Thank you very much. So those are all the questions that we've received so far. We've got a couple of minutes left if people do have anything further to add, but I just want to take the opportunity to give attendees a little bit more information about how they can register this on the CPD tool. So attendees who have logged in today, you can register this as CPD using the IES CPD tool. So do log into the IES members area and you can do this through your login details. If you've got any problems, contact the project office and we can do that for you. Gloria has agreed for this presentation to be recorded and it will be added to the YouTube channel. So we will share the link to that and hopefully the attachment that Gloria mentioned earlier will be circulated to you all as well. We have a couple of other events for the IAQM coming up and the IES. So on the 10th of November, we have our Early Careers Network Air Quality and Beyond pub quiz. For those who are interested, it's available to those who are in the early career proportion of their career. And you can register to attend that online. It's free to attend for all of our members. And from the IES side, we have a forum on the 20th of October, which will be looking at the impact of COVID-19 on environmental data sets, which may be of huge interest to yourselves in the air quality field as well. So further details around that is on the IES website and again, free to attend. So we haven't received any further questions, so I'm going to take that as an opportunity to close the webinar. So thank you again hugely to Gloria. That was a really interesting presentation, and thank you all to submitting questions. I hope you found that valuable. And as I say, this will be available on the YouTube channel for you to use as a learning resource after today. So thank you again for your time and for presenting with us. Thank you all attendees who logged in. I hope you found that really beneficial, and do check out the IAQM and IES website for further opportunities of events that are coming up later on in the year. So thank you all for attending. Enjoy your afternoon.